Do you think silence in a family says more than shouting?
Picture this particular scenario unfolding on a sticky Tuesday evening in our quiet Columbus neighborhood, where the air carries the familiar scent of freshly cut grass mingling with the distant aroma of barbecue wafting from the cul-de-sac barbecues that seem to happen every other weekend, reminding everyone of those simple summer gatherings that bind communities together in the Midwest. I am Sarah Thompson, a 48-year-old woman who has navigated the choppy waters of divorce and rebuilt a life that suits me just fine. Complete with my cozy two-bedroom house and a steady career in real estate where I close deals on those classic split-level homes, much like the one my mother still occupies, a place filled with memories of stability amid the uncertainties that life often throws our way. However, family has an uncanny ability to disrupt even the most carefully constructed peace, and on this day, my estranged brother Mark arrived unannounced at Mom's door, flashing his trademark grin that hides more shadows than sunlight, accompanied by his latest girlfriend Tina, who scanned the living room with the calculating eyes of someone appraising an unexpected windfall rather than a family reunion. He declared with that overconfident tone he has always possessed, "We're moving in Friday," as if it were the most natural progression in the world, adding that Mom had already given her blessing because, in his words, it was high time the family stuck together again after all these years of scattered lives and unspoken resentments. I simply nodded in response, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes because engaging in one of Mark's grand proclamations has historically felt like attempting to reason with a force of nature that refuses to be tamed, and in that moment, I reached for my phone not just to distract myself, but to fire off a quick text to my best friend about the absurdity of this sudden intrusion into our established routines. Mere seconds later. However, my alarm app emitted a sharp ping that cut through the conversation like a warning siren, displaying a notification for motion detected at Mom's back door along with a recorded clip of what appeared to be trespassing activity, sending my heart into a frantic rhythm as I process the implications of someone, or something, lurking just beyond the familiar thresholds of safety we all take for granted in our suburban sanctuaries. And then, as the reality settled in like an unwelcome fog, the true unraveling of trust and hidden agendas began to take shape, pulling me into a web of suspicion that would challenge everything I thought I knew about loyalty and the fragile bonds that hold families together. That piercing ping lingered in my mind long after Mark continued his rambling explanation about how he intended to fix the leaky faucet that Mom had mentioned in passing during one of their sporadic phone calls, a problem that had annoyed her for months, but never escalated to the point of urgency until now, with his arrival casting everything in a new light of potential exploitation. I mumbled an excuse about heavy traffic on the interstate, which was partially true given the construction delays that plague Ohio roads this time of year, and made a hasty exit to my car, where my thoughts raced ahead of the engine as I gripped the steering wheel tightly, replaying the footage on my phone that showed a shadowy figure slipping around the side yard with movements too purposeful to dismiss as a neighborhood cat or a gust of wind disturbing the bushes. By the time I pulled into Mom's driveway just 10 minutes later, the sun had dipped low enough to stretch long shadows across the azalea bushes she had planted meticulously after Dad's passing 15 years ago, a tribute to the enduring beauty she always sought even in grief, and I could already hear Mark's voice booming from inside, no doubt charming her with embellished tales of his latest sales breakthrough that, based on past patterns, was more wishful thinking than actual accomplishment. The app's feed had cleared by then, but the timestamp aligned perfectly with the moment of his arrival, planting seeds of doubt that this so-called trespass might not be the work of a random intruder, but something far more personal and insidious, tied directly to the man who had spent years drifting from one failed venture to another while the rest of us held down the fort. I used my spare key to let myself into the house quietly, the one Mom had entrusted to me years earlier when her mild dementia first surfaced as occasional lapses in memory that made her anxious about being alone for extended periods, and the familiar scent of her pot roast wafted from the kitchen, a comforting aroma now tinged with an undercurrent of unease that made my stomach twist uncomfortably. "Sarah, honey, come in and meet Tina properly," Mom called out from her spot by the stove, her voice carrying that frail warmth characteristic of her 82 years. The same voice that had guided us through Dad's layoffs at the auto plant and our own adolescent rebellions, with a mix of firmness and forgiveness. Mark was sprawled at the kitchen table as if he already owned the space, his feet propped up casually on a chair while Tina sat absorbed in her phone, barely acknowledging the introductions. Her disinterest speaking volumes about the transient nature of Mark's relationships that have always mirrored his unstable career path. I went through the motions of politeness, hugging Mom a little longer than usual to reassure both of us amid the growing tension, and as we settled into small talk about the latest neighborhood drama. The Johnsons' messy divorce sparked by his obsessive poker nights, a cautionary tale that resonates with so many couples in our age bracket navigating midlife stresses. My gaze kept drifting toward the back door, where no obvious signs of forced entry appeared, though the motion sensor light flickered intermittently as if echoing my inner turmoil. Once Mark and Tina departed with their assurances of ordering pizza for the move-in on Friday, a promise that felt as hollow as his past commitments, I lingered to help Mom with the dishes. A routine that allowed us to connect without the pressure of deeper conversations she sometimes struggled with due to her condition. It was during this mundane task that I noticed her jewelry box on the sideboard positioned slightly askew, the one containing Grandma's pearls and other heirlooms passed down through generations, suggesting it had been disturbed hastily by hands unfamiliar with the careful respect such items deserve. When I inquired gently about it, Mom dismissed the observation with a wave of her hand, claiming she had simply been tidying up earlier in the day, but the brief flicker in her eyes betrayed a moment of uncertainty, a hallmark of her dementia that often left her questioning her own actions and opening the door to manipulation by those who might exploit such vulnerabilities. I nodded once more, swallowing the impulse to voice my mounting concerns because pressing her at that juncture could only heighten her confusion without providing clarity, a choice that might frustrate those listening who would advocate for immediate confrontation. Yet, in the delicate dance of family dynamics, caution often feels like the only safe step forward. Instead, I waited until she dozed off in her recliner, the television murmuring promotions for those miracle cleaning products that promise to erase years of wear and tear, before stepping outside to inspect the yard more thoroughly. My sneakers crunching softly on the gravel path as my pulse quickened with each shadowed corner I approached. There, concealed under the welcome mat by the patio door in a spot no sensible person would choose for security, lay a shiny new key that gleamed unnaturally in the porch light, distinct from Mom's well-worn spares and evoking immediate questions about its purpose and origin. It didn't align with the house's locks upon a quick test, resembling instead something for a vehicle or perhaps a safety deposit box where sensitive documents might be stashed away from prying eyes. And my thoughts immediately connected it to Mark's history of financial missteps, including the incident years ago when he borrowed Dad's tools under the pretense of a short-term need and pawned them off to fund a stock tip that ultimately vanished like smoke. With a sly sense of satisfaction creeping in despite the knot of anxiety in my chest, I slipped the key into my pocket, deciding that my first act of retaliation would be subtle yet pointed, leveraging my real estate network to generate a forged utility shutoff notice addressed specifically to Mark, detailing fictitious overdue payments from his previous residence that would arrive in his email inbox anonymously and prompt him to question the creditors he had likely evaded before. A petty but gratifying way to remind him that his carefree invasions came with consequences he couldn't easily ignore. As I drove home through the dimly lit streets, a chuckle escaped me at the mental image of Mark's confident facade cracking upon reading that notice, his face paling as old debts resurfaced in his imagination. Yet the levity faded quickly when my phone vibrated with an incoming message from an unknown number that read, "Stay out of it, sis." Or else, sending a chill racing down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling autumn air. Who could have sent such a direct warning, and why did it coincide so precisely with my discoveries, making the flickering house lights in my rearview mirror seem almost like a deliberate signal that the shadows around Mom's home were far from dispelled? That ominous text message from the unknown number lingered in my thoughts throughout the restless night, causing me to toss and turn in my bed as if sleep were a luxury I could no longer afford amid the swirling uncertainties that Mark's sudden reappearance had unleashed upon our already fragile family equilibrium. Yet by the time morning light filtered through my curtains, I had rationalized it away as possibly a mistaken dispatch intended for one of Mark's many debtors whom he had likely left in the lurch during his nomadic pursuits of quick fortunes that always seemed to evaporate just as swiftly as they materialized. Nevertheless, the unease persisted like an itch I couldn't scratch, compelling me to return to Mom's house under the pretext of delivering her favorite glazed donuts from the corner bakery on Main Street. Those sweet treats that evoked memories of county fairs from our childhood summers when life felt boundless and unburdened by the adult complications of financial strains and sibling rivalries that now dominated our interactions. She greeted me at the door with a genuine smile that softened the lines of worry etched into her face over the years, chattering animatedly about how Mark had telephoned earlier to confirm his plans for mowing the lawn come Friday as part of his commitment to easing her daily burdens, though I detected a subtle exhaustion in her posture as she leaned against the doorframe, a reminder of how her advancing age and mild dementia sometimes amplified the weight of even minor changes in routine. We settled at the kitchen table, the same worn oak surface scarred from decades of family meals and heated discussions, where I casually broached the subject of the key I had discovered the previous evening, framing it as a simple curiosity rather than an accusation, only for her to respond with a vague assertion that it must belong to the occasional gardener she hired sporadically to trim the hedges, yet the hesitation in her voice and the way her eyes darted away suggested a deeper layer of uncertainty that Mark might have woven into her recollections to maintain his narrative of benevolence. Once Mom had retreated for her mid-morning nap, a habit she had developed to combat the fatigue that accompanied her condition, I allowed my curiosity to override caution and tested the mystery key on the various entry points around the property. Finding that it failed to engage the main back door but turned smoothly in the lock of the detached garage on the side, granting access to a space cluttered with seasonal storage bins overflowing with holiday decorations and the remnants of my own adolescent relics like an old bicycle frame gathering dust in the corner. Amid this disorganized archive of family history, partially obscured behind the humming chest freezer that Mom used for bulk purchases from the local warehouse club, stood a nondescript cardboard box secured with fresh packing tape that bore no labels or markings, prompting me to pry it open carefully with a nearby screwdriver while my heart pounded in anticipation of uncovering evidence that could either vindicate my suspicions or force me to confront uncomfortable truths about my brother's intentions. Inside lay meticulously stacked documents that revealed a troubling pattern of financial desperation, including multiple loan applications filled out in Mark's unmistakable handwriting with dates stretching back over the past year, each requesting substantial sums such as $50,000 from one predatory online lender and $30,000 from another. Institutions notorious for their exorbitant interest rates that ensnared borrowers in cycles of debt, much like the ones that plagued so many working-class families in the Rust Belt during economic downturns. Deeper within the box, a crumpled official letter from a collections agency caught my eye, its bold print threatening legal action, including potential liens on any available family assets should the outstanding balances remain unpaid, and the phrase family assets struck me with chilling clarity as it undoubtedly referred to Mom's home, the very property Dad had purchased outright with his hard-earned savings from long shifts at the auto plant, transforming what should have been a sanctuary of security into a target for Mark's opportunistic maneuvering. Snapping discreet photographs of the incriminating paperwork with my phone for later reference, my mind raced through the implications as a real estate professional who had witnessed countless foreclosures driven by similar schemes where unscrupulous relatives preyed upon vulnerable elders. And it became painfully evident that Mark's proclaimed desire to move in stemmed not from familial duty, but from a calculated strategy to ingratiate himself sufficiently to co-sign documents or exert influence over decisions regarding the property's future. Although confronting him directly might have seemed the straightforward path, I opted instead for a more indirect form of retribution that aligned with my growing resolve to protect what was ours without immediately shattering Mom's fragile trust in her son. So I crafted an anonymous tip to his supervisor at the sales firm where he eked out a living by cold calling leads on overpriced gadgets, suggesting through a disposable email account that Mark was planning extended family leave due to unspecified emergencies that could jeopardize an upcoming client presentation, a ploy designed to sow doubt and potentially derail a commission he had likely been boasting about in his social media posts. The satisfaction derived from this clever interference carried a hint of guilty pleasure, reminiscent of those small victories in neighborhood spats where one neighbor outsmarts another without resorting to outright hostility, and by the evening, as I heated a solitary microwave meal in my kitchen while reviewing the captured images, Mark's online presence erupted with cryptic complaints about unreliable colleagues and unforeseen setbacks, eliciting a suppressed chuckle from me at the irony of his predicament mirroring the very instability he inflicted upon others. Yet as I pored over the details of those loan documents once more, attempting to discern the timeline of his escalating troubles and pondering why he had chosen this precise moment to target Mom after years of minimal contact that had allowed us all to maintain a semblance of peace, my alarm app suddenly activated with another insistent notification, this time indicating motion detected in the basement area of the house where the feed captured a fleeting shadow darting with deliberate intent across the dimly lit space, far too methodical to attribute to a stray animal or environmental glitch. I sat bolt upright, dialing Mom's landline repeatedly only to hear it ring unanswered into the void, leaving me gripped by a surge of panic that questioned whether the intruder was a mere opportunist or someone connected to Mark's shadowy dealings, and what exactly lurked in the depths below that could unravel the threads of our family's already tenuous stability. The basement motion alert propelled me into action with an urgency that overrode any lingering hesitation about delving deeper into what felt increasingly like a tangled web of familial deceit spun by Mark's unpredictable whims. So I accelerated toward Mom's house with the dashboard lights blurring past familiar landmarks like the strip malls and weathered billboards advertising used car deals that dotted the Ohio landscape, my mind a whirlwind of scenarios ranging from a harmless electrical fault to something far more sinister connected to the financial pitfalls I had just uncovered in the garage. Upon arriving, I fumbled with my keys at the side door, the cool evening air carrying the faint scent of impending rain that often accompanied these autumn transitions, and burst into the living room where Mom sat peacefully flipping through faded photo albums on the couch, her expression one of nostalgic serenity that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing inside me as she looked up with mild surprise and inquired if everything was all right with a tone that suggested she sensed my agitation without fully grasping its source. I managed a nod and fabricated an excuse about needing to inspect the sump pump due to the recent heavy showers that had flooded basements in the neighborhood. A lie that slipped out easily because revealing the full extent of my suspicions might overwhelm her fragile state and erode the trust she still placed in Mark despite his spotty history, though in retrospect, those listening might view my evasion as a missed opportunity to rally her against the encroaching threat before it could solidify further. Descending the creaky wooden stairs into the basement, I activated the flashlight on my phone to pierce the gloom. The air down there thick with the musty aroma of concrete and old storage mingled with an unexpected trace of cigarette smoke that seemed out of place, since Mom had quit the habit decades ago during Dad's health scare, a detail that heightened my wariness as I scanned the dimly lit expanse cluttered with forgotten boxes and shelves sagging under the weight of preserved canning jars from her gardening days. Under the harsh glow of the single bare bulb that swayed slightly from the vibration of my footsteps, I located the origin of the disturbance near a cluster of utility shelves, where another unassuming box had been partially unpacked with its contents spilling onto the floor in disarray, revealing not the illicit contraband my imagination had briefly conjured, but a more insidious collection of financial documents that built upon the discoveries from the garage, including additional stacks of overdue notices from credit agencies and a series of Mom's personal checks endorsed in blank with dates aligning suspiciously with Mark's recent communications. alongside a battered laptop displaying a cracked screen that hummed faintly when I pressed the power button, its interface locked behind a password but hinting at recent activity through the glow of cached notifications. No drugs or weapons marred the scene, thank goodness, preserving the realism of our everyday struggles rather than veering into melodramatic extremes, yet the implications painted Mark as an opportunistic forger preying on Mom's occasional memory lapses to siphon funds for what I surmised were his persistent gambling habits. Those late-night poker sessions from his youth that had escalated into online vices capable of draining savings accounts with ruthless efficiency. A sudden twist emerged as I navigated the laptop's limited access, uncovering a thread of emails exchanged between Mark and a colleague in real estate, someone I vaguely recognized from industry mixers, discussing preliminary steps for a quick sale of the family home, leveraging Mom's perceived health decline as a sympathetic angle to expedite approvals and maximize returns, a betrayal that ignited a fury within me at the thought of him commodifying our shared heritage for personal gain while I had poured years into maintaining my own stability post-divorce. Mom's voice echoed down from upstairs then, wavering with a hint of concern that pulled me back to the present and compelled me to ascend for a cup of chamomile tea in her delicate floral china that she reserved for quieter moments of connection, where she unexpectedly launched into a defense of Mark without any prompting from me, insisting that he had truly turned over a new leaf and deserved the grace of second chances after the hardships life had dealt him, a perspective rooted in her unwavering maternal optimism that clashed with the evidence piling up and left me silently disagreeing with her naivety, even as I recognized how such blind faith had sustained our family through tougher times like Dad's prolonged unemployment spells. Opting against the nuclear option of alerting authorities immediately, which might fracture her world irreparably and invite legal entanglements I wasn't prepared to navigate alone. I channeled my indignation into a third calculated act of revenge that drew upon my professional expertise in property marketing, crafting an anonymous online listing on a local community forum for a charming vintage family residence, while subtly infusing it with tales of persistent hauntings and unexplained occurrences tied to the address in veiled references, designed to deter any potential buyers Mark might be quietly lining up and instead attract a flurry of curious but unserious inquiries that would complicate his schemes without direct confrontation. The post went live that afternoon, and by nightfall, responses flooded in with humorous speculations about ghostly residents and bargain hunters wary of spectral liabilities, evoking a wry amusement in me at the poetic justice of turning the house's perceived value into a punchline that mirrored Mark's inflated self-importance, all while savoring the light vindication of outmaneuvering him on terrain where I held the advantage. As the evening wore on, and we shared a simple supper of reheated leftovers that carried the comforting flavors of home-cooked meals from simpler eras, the atmosphere in the house thickened with unspoken tensions that seemed to press against the walls like an accumulating storm, culminating in a moment when Mom reached for her glass of water only to falter suddenly, her face paling as she clutched the table edge and collapsed into my arms with a soft gasp, her frail form trembling while she whispered incoherently about Mark having taken something long ago, in a voice laced with long-buried regret that hinted at secrets from his past I had never fully grasped. In the ensuing chaos of dialing emergency services and cradling her head, the basement door upstairs creaked open of its own accord with no apparent cause from wind or drafts, suggesting that whatever shadows lingered below had not yet been fully exorcised and might harbor presences waiting to emerge at the most inopportune hour. Mom's sudden collapse and that cryptic whisper about Mark having taken something from the past reverberated through my sleepless hours following the basement incident, transforming the quiet of my own home into a space filled with echoes of unresolved grievances that had simmered beneath the surface of our family interactions for decades. Yet as dawn broke with its pale light seeping through the blinds, I steeled myself with a renewed determination to probe further into the shadows without alerting Mark to my growing vigilance, starting with a visit to the local clinic where the doctor had recommended a follow-up after attributing her episode to a dip in blood sugar exacerbated by irregular meals. A diagnosis that carried undertones of neglect when considering how Mark's arrival had disrupted her established routines without any apparent effort to maintain them. Arriving at the sterile waiting room amid the hum of fluorescent lights and the subdued conversations of other patients, navigating their midlife health concerns, I waited impatiently until the physician pulled me aside into his office, his expression grave as he detailed how stress from recent changes in her living situation could accelerate the progression of her dementia if not managed carefully. A subtle indictment that pointed toward Mark's self-absorbed presence as a contributing factor rather than the supportive force he portrayed to anyone who would listen, leaving me to grapple with the internal dilemma of whether to escalate this to authorities by reporting the signs of financial elder abuse I had documented or to continue my solitary path of subtle interventions that risked isolating me further from the support systems I might need if his schemes deepened. Back at Mom's house shortly thereafter, I found Mark already ensconced in the guest room unpacking what appeared to be an assortment of mismatched luggage that spoke to the impermanence of his lifestyle, with Tina reclining on the living room couch absorbed in a glossy magazine that featured lifestyle advice for couples seeking stability. An irony that nearly drew a bitter laugh from me given the instability Mark perpetually sowed in his wake as he shot me a pointed glare that conveyed his unspoken accusation of meddling in affairs that were none of my concern, framing me in his narrative as the jealous sibling envious of his newfound role as the dutiful son. Sensing an opportunity to gather more intelligence, while he claimed to run errands that likely involved evading creditors or scouting further opportunities for gain, I engaged Tina in the kitchen under the guise of preparing a casual lunch from the pantry staples Mom kept stocked for such impromptu visits, drawing her out with neutral questions about their recent travels that gradually shifted to the undercurrents of tension in their relationship, where she revealed with a sigh of frustration that Mark's secretive side hustles kept him out until the early hours and sparked frequent arguments over finances that left her feeling more like a reluctant accomplice than a partner in his visions of prosperity. Her admissions painted a picture of neglect that echoed the abandonment Mark had inflicted on our family during the darkest days of my divorce 5 years prior, when he vanished into his own pursuits instead of offering even a token of solidarity, a pattern that now threatened to engulf Mom in the same disregard, intensifying my moral quandary as I weighed the potential fallout of involving law enforcement, visions of courtroom dramas disrupting her fragile peace against the satisfaction of justice served, yet ultimately deciding to fortify my defenses through personal ingenuity rather than bureaucratic channels that might prolong the agony for all involved. With that resolve, I executed my fourth act of retribution laced with a touch of whimsical humor to deflate Mark's carefully cultivated image as the reformed family man, accessing his carelessly logged-out dating profile on the shared family computer during a brief window of privacy and altering his bio to portray him as a devoted homebody eager to join knitting circles and bake sales with like-minded grandmas, complete with mismatched photos of floral aprons and yarn skeins sourced from stock. Images that would baffle his contacts and elicit waves of ridicule without tracing back to me directly. The modifications took effect swiftly, and by mid-afternoon, as I monitored from my phone while pretending to sort through Mom's mail at the kitchen table, Mark's social feeds buzzed with incoming messages and shares that poked fun at his apparent midlife pivot toward domestic hobbies, the backlash hitting him like a poorly negotiated real estate deal gone sour and forcing him to storm out of the house in a huff, his face flushed with embarrassment as he muttered accusations of sabotage under his breath, a reaction that provided a fleeting sense of triumph amid the ongoing tension, reminiscent of those neighborhood tales where one resident cleverly turns the tables on an overreaching neighbor without descending into outright conflict. Mom appeared somewhat revitalized that evening, joining us for a dinner of her signature pot roast that filled the dining room with savory aromas evoking holidays from our youth when Dad would regale us with stories from the plant over plates piled high. Yet the atmosphere remained charged with undercurrents of unease as conversations skirted the edges of the day's revelations, Mark's forced joviality clashing with Tina's withdrawn silence and my own guarded responses that masked the storm of emotions churning within. Just as the meal concluded and we cleared the table in a semblance of normalcy, a firm knock echoed from the front door, prompting Mark to answer it with evident anticipation, only to receive a padded envelope from a nondescript delivery service bearing no return address, but marked with postage from a Las Vegas post office. Its substantial weight in his hands hinting at contents that could range from a windfall to a devastating reckoning tied to his gambling entanglements, leaving me to wonder, in the suspended moment, what explosive secrets it held that might finally tip the scales of our fractured family dynamic into irreversible chaos. The arrival of that padded envelope from the Las Vegas post office marked a pivotal escalation in the undercurrents of suspicion that had been building since Mark's uninvited announcement, its mysterious weight in his grasp during dinner transforming the otherwise mundane act of clearing plates into a tableau of barely contained anticipation, where every glance exchanged hinted at the volatile secrets it might unleash upon our already strained family gathering. And as he retreated to the den, with it clutched tightly against his chest, barking at me to stay out of his personal matters, I felt a surge of resolve to finally bridge the gap between my accumulated evidence and decisive action. Recognizing that Mom's presence in the adjoining room demanded a measured approach even as her earlier collapse lingered in my mind like a warning of the physical toll this drama exacted on her waning strength. While Mark tore into the package with the fervor of someone both dreading and craving its revelations, I slipped away under the pretense of brewing a fresh pot of decaffeinated tea for Mom, using the momentary diversion to access my phone and forward the compiled photographs of the loan documents, blank checks, and email threads to a trusted probate attorney friend from my real estate circles who specialized in elder protection cases, framing the anonymous tip with just enough detail to prompt an official inquiry without implicating myself directly. A fifth and culminating revenge that leveraged my professional network to ensnare Mark in the very legal tangles his forgeries had sown, delivering a witty inversion of his predatory tactics by turning the machinery of the law against him in a manner that promised satisfaction without the messiness of personal confrontation. The attorney's swift callback later that evening, disguised as a casual check-in about a mutual client's property listing, confirmed the envelope's contents as a draft of a will purportedly signed by Mom, naming Mark as the sole beneficiary of her estate, including the house and any remaining assets, complete with notarization stamps that screamed forgery upon cursory examination. A bombshell that aligned with the subtle clues I had pieced together from the basement laptop and garage files, painting a comprehensive picture of his scheme to supplant my role as the responsible caretaker through manipulated documents designed to exploit her dementia for his financial salvation. Armed with this validation, I chose the quiet hours after Mom had retired for the night to initiate the confrontation in the dimly lit kitchen where the remnants of dinner still cluttered the counters, the air thick with the lingering sense of pot roast and unresolved tension as Mark paced with the papers in hand, his initial bravado crumbling into defensive posturing when I laid out the evidence methodically on the table, starting with the utility spoof that had rattled his creditor fears and progressing through the anonymous tip to his boss, the haunted listing that had scared off phantom buyers, and the humorous sabotage of his dating profile that had exposed his duplicitous persona to his social circle. Each revelation stripping away layers of his fabricated narrative until he stood there, face ashen and arguments faltering like a poorly constructed sales pitch facing a savvy client. He attempted to gaslight me at first, dismissing the discoveries as products of my post-divorce paranoia and insisting that his intentions were purely to secure the family's legacy against what he termed my selfish independence. A twist that momentarily humanized him by admitting the crushing weight of his gambling debts accrued over years of chasing illusions in casinos far from home. Yet the plea rang hollow when juxtaposed against the forged will that threatened to disinherit not just me, but the very security Mom had built brick by brick alongside Dad through their shared sacrifices. In the auto industry's boom and bust cycles, Mom's unexpected entrance into the kitchen, drawn by the rising voices that pierced her light sleep, shattered the standoff as she absorbed the fragments of truth in halting whispers. her eyes widening with a dawning recognition that pierced through the fog of her condition, leading her to confront Mark directly with a trembling accusation of broken promises that echoed the whisper from her collapse about the long-ago theft of Dad's war bonds, a revelation that forced him to acknowledge the pattern of betrayal stretching back to his youth and culminating in this desperate bid for redemption through exploitation. In the emotional aftermath, as Tina gathered their belongings in stunned silence from the guest room, Mark's resistance dissolved into a reluctant agreement to vacate by morning, the weight of impending legal scrutiny from my attorney's involvement compelling him to slink away with tail between his legs, leaving behind a hollow echo of apologies that felt more like self-preservation than genuine remorse. And as the front door clicked shut behind them for what I hoped was the final time, Mom and I shared a quiet vigil over mugs of cooling tea, her hand clasped in mine conveying a mix of relief and sorrow that mirrored the complex emotions roiling within me at having orchestrated his departure through a series of clever maneuvers that satisfied my sense of justice, yet left me questioning the ethical corners I had cut in the process, choices that listeners might decry as overly vengeful when simpler paths like early intervention could have spared us all this heartache. The house settled into an unfamiliar peace by dawn, the first rays illuminating the familiar rooms now free of intrusion, but as I tidied the den where the envelope's remnants lay scattered, a final text illuminated my phone from Mark's number stating simply, "You won this round, but blood's thicker than any scheme. Watch your back," a cryptic message that sowed seeds of ambiguity about whether it constituted a lingering threat born of resentment or a reluctant olive branch acknowledging the unbreakable ties that bound us despite the fractures, prompting me to wonder if deeper family secrets still lurked in the unexamined corners of our history, leaving the resolution not as a clean victory but as an open question of whether trust could ever truly be rebuilt on foundations eroded by such profound deceptions.